When June's father discovered she was pregnant, he didn't ask who the father was. He just dragged her into the wilderness and gave her away like livestock. But the man he gave her to was what anyone expected. He didn't speak much, just pointed to the cabin door, then walked back toward the shed like she was no different from the sack of feed her father had left him along with her. June stood there, her wrists still red from the rope burn, her eyes swollen from the slap she hadn't seen coming. Her father hadn't given her a final word, only a grunt. Then he rode off, back down the mountain trail without looking back. She was barely 17, barefoot in snow, belly beginning to swell, and now left in the middle of nowhere with a man twice her size who hadn't said a single word. The cabin door creaked open. Warmth hit her face. Firelight danced from the hearth across the wooden floor, a cot in one corner, a rough table, a basin, hooks on the wall with furs, a shotgun over the mantel. Then she turned, he was gone. June stepped in slowly, the door shutting behind her by the wind's hand, not his. She sank down by the fire, clutching her arms around her middle. Her father hadn't asked who the father was. He hadn't asked anything. Just marched into her room, pulled her out by the hair and stuffed her into the wagon. "It's your shame," he'd growled. "You'll live with it or die with it. I won't have your sin rotting this house." And then the ride. Hours, no food, no stop, only snow and silence and the sound of her own heart breaking in her ears. Now the only thing breaking was the firewood in the hearth. Then the sound of heavy boots coming back up the porch. She didn't move. He opened the door with a push of his shoulder, taller than she remembered. Broad shoulders under a wolf pelt, thick beard, dark eyes. He glanced at her once, just once, then walked to the fire, tossed down 2 rabbits and started skinning them without a word. She stared at him. He didn't glance back. Finally her voice cracked. "What's your name?" He didn't look up. "I said, Rourke." Just that, a flat word. Then silence again, thick and awkward. Her fingers trembled in her lap. "What do you want from me?" she asked, staring now. Still no eye contact. He gutted one of the rabbits. "I didn't ask for you," he muttered. The words hit like a slap. June felt the sting in her chest, but she bit it down. She cried enough that morning. She wouldn't give him the tears now. She lay down on the floor beside the fire that night. He hadn't offered the cot and she didn't dare take it. Her hands curled around her belly. She hadn't told anyone yet, but she felt it already. The tiny fluttering inside her that didn't come from hunger or fear. The life growing in her. The only thing she had left. The next few days passed in silence. Rourke left before dawn, returned after dusk, always with meat or wood or both. She never saw where he went, only heard the sound of axe striking tree, gunfire in the woods, birds scattering. He never touched her, never asked questions, didn't even look at her long. June cleaned because she didn't know what else to do. Cooked what little she could, though her hands were clumsy from lack of practice. Her father hadn't let her near the hearth, said that was her mother's job till the day she died. It was on the 5th morning that she saw the blood. It stained the front of her dress when she woke. Her scream brought him in from outside, snow on his shoulders, axe in hand. "I'm bleeding," she whispered, voice shrill. "It's too early, I don't know." He moved fast, tossed the axe down, came to her side, looked once, then swept her up in his arms and carried her to the cot without asking permission. She lay there shivering, whispering over and over, "Please not the baby, please not the baby, please not the baby." Rourke didn't speak, Just stoked the fire hotter, then boiled water, then brought every fur in the cabin over to cover her. She saw his hands tremble once, just once, as he wrapped her legs and checked the bleeding. Hours passed. The blood slowed. The cramping stopped. She didn't lose it. He sat beside her that night, on the floor, back to the wall, watching the fire with a face she couldn't read. "You cared," she whispered. He didn't blink. "Don't flatter yourself." But his voice cracked when he said it. She didn't say anything else. Just listened to the crackle of firewood and the soft, steady breath of the man who hadn't smiled once since she arrived, but had carried her like something breakable. By the second week, she started to notice things. A second bowl placed beside his at dinner, even if he didn't offer it. A blanket folded near the hearth, new, clean, untouched, but left there for her. Her boots stitched at the sole, mended without her asking. He wasn't cruel, he wasn't kind either. He was something else, something unreadable. Then came the storm. It roared down from the mountains like a beast, trapping them in the cabin for 5 days straight. Wind howled. Snow buried the porch. The fire stayed lit, but food ran low. They spoke only in essentials. "Hand me that pot. There's a leak by the shutter. Eat this, it's warm." But it was on the third night, after she slipped on the ice by the door, landing hard, that he finally raised his voice. "What were you thinking, going out like that?" She winced, holding her elbow. "I needed snow for water. I told you I'd get it. You were asleep." He grabbed the bandages and moved toward her. She flinched. He stopped cold. "I'm not your father," he said, voice low. She looked up, startled. He crouched down, gentler now. "You don't flinch like that unless someone else made you expect a blow." She said nothing. "I won't hit you," he muttered, "even if you mouth off." She stared at him for a long time, then whispered, "You're the first man who's ever said that to me." Rourke didn't reply, just wrapped her arm carefully, his big hands strangely tender. That night she sat on the cot instead of the floor. He didn't stop her. And when she cried, silent, slow, ashamed, he didn't speak, just sat in the dark listening. It was the 6th week when the fever came. She woke drenched in sweat, teeth chattering, the world spinning. Rourke's hand was on her forehead before she could call his name. He said nothing, just bolted to the door, saddled the mule, and vanished into the storm. He was gone 2 days. When he returned, his face was wind-burned, lips cracked, hands frozen near black. But he had herbs, cloth, and something warm in a flask she didn't recognize. She sipped it and slept. When she woke again, the fever had broken. Rourke looked worse than her, gaunt, eyes dark with worry. She whispered, "Why'd you come back?" He blinked. She tried to smile. "You could have let the fever do the work." He didn't laugh, just shook his head once. "I'm not your father." That was all he said. But it was enough. The spring thaw came late, clawing its way down the mountain like something reluctant to wake. Mud swallowed the trail. Ice clung to the roof. The snows melted, but the cold lingered, as if it too wasn't ready to leave. Rourke was gone longer each day now, trapping and foraging, carrying more than usual on his shoulders, though he barely spoke of it. June's belly grew, quietly, a steady bloom beneath the folds of her threadbare dress. He didn't mention it, didn't ask how far along she was, but she saw the glances. The way his eyes dropped sometimes when she moved too fast or reached too high. He noticed. He always noticed, even when he pretended not to. He didn't smile, not once, but he boiled her bathwater now without being asked, left bread by the hearth in the mornings, took to carving little things, small animals mostly, and leaving them on the windowsill like they'd walked in by accident. Once she found a wooden bird, wings spread like it had just landed. He never said it was his. June didn't press, but she watched him closely now, trying to read the edges of the man who had no patience for conversation but had carried her through fever, wrapped her wounds, mended her boots, and brought back wildflowers wrapped in bark as if by mistake. And still he said nothing about the child growing inside her. Until the day the dog followed him home. It was scraggly, half-starved, with a limp in its hind leg, and eyes as desperate as its ribs were sharp. Rourke found it near the trap line, snarled at him once, then collapsed at his feet. He brought it back without a word. June was the one who named it. Tinder, she said, stroking its matted fur by the fire that night. Cause he caught quick to the warmth. Rourke didn't argue. He just kept his back to her, sharpening his blade with long, deliberate strokes. But that night, when the wind whistled cold through the chimney and the dog whimpered in its sleep, Rourke laid another pelt near the hearth, said nothing, just nudged it closer. 3 days later, Tinder wouldn't leave June's side. "Guess he's decided who he belongs to," she murmured, scratching behind the dog's ears as it leaned into her lap. Rourke didn't respond, but he didn't hide the ghost of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth either. That night something changed. It began with a question. Rourke stood by the window after supper, staring out into the dark. June sat on the cot, rubbing her back. The silence had stretched too long and the baby was kicking harder now, like it knew something had shifted. Then Rourke turned. "How far along are you?" he asked. She blinked. He never asked questions, not like that, not looking her full in the face. She swallowed. 6 months, give or take. He nodded, didn't sit, just stood there as still as timber. "Is the father gone?" he asked, slower this time. June's throat tightened. Her eyes dropped to her lap. He wasn't a father, not really. He was the preacher's son. Rourke said nothing. "He promised me he'd marry me," she went on, voice thinner now. "Said he loved me. We met behind the schoolhouse every Thursday after choir. I thought it meant something." She laughed, bitter. "Turns out I meant less than nothing to him. When I told him I was late, he told his father I'd seduced him, said I was trying to trap a man of God." She looked up. "You know what my father did after that?" Rourke's jaw worked slow, but his hands stayed loose at his sides. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. June blinked. "For what?" "For how they treated you." He didn't say it like a man trying to fix something. He said it like he understood it couldn't be undone. She stared at him a long moment. "Then why'd you take me?" He hesitated. "I owed your father." That stung. She looked away. "He saved my life once," Rourke continued. "Years ago, pulled me out of a river I'd fallen through. I was drunk, stupid. He never let me forget it." "So he gave you a girl in exchange?" Her voice cracked. "A pregnant one, no less." "I didn't know," Rourke said. "He said he had someone who needed a place, said she was difficult." June let the word burn through her. He went on. "I didn't ask questions, figured it'd be another mouth, another hand for cooking. Then I saw your face, the bruises, the way you held your arms. That was difficult. That was abandoned." Silence fell again. Only this time it did ache. It settled. That night she dreamt of rivers and ice, and a man lifting her from freezing water, not because he owed anything, but because he couldn't bear to let her drown. The baby came early. It started with cramps, tight, sharp. June bit down on the pain until her lip bled. She didn't want to scream, didn't want to wake him, but the water broke before dawn and her body gave her no choice. Rourke was at her side in seconds. He didn't ask what to do, he just did it. Boiled water, laid out towels, built the fire higher, cleared the floor. He moved like a man who'd helped bring life into the world before, but she knew he hadn't. She was too far gone to question it. The pain was unbearable, a storm tearing through her bones. She screamed once, then twice, then didn't care how many times after that. Rourke held her hand, let her crush his fingers, whispered things that didn't make sense but helped anyway. Almost there. You're strong. He's almost here. She laughed through tears. How do you know it's a he? I don't, he said, just feels like one. But when the baby came, red and wet and howling with a rage only new life knows, it wasn't a boy. It was a girl. Tiny, perfect, with dark hair and fists curled like stars. June sobbed, not from pain now, from something deeper, something whole. Rourke cut the cord, wrapped the child, handed her over like she was a miracle. He didn't smile, but his eyes were glassy when he looked at them both. What will you name her? He asked. June looked down. Hope. He nodded. She's everything I didn't think I'd get to have. She looked up, and I wouldn't have her without you. He shook his head. You'd have survived. No, she whispered, not like this. Rourke didn't answer. But that night, as the baby slept in June's arms, he dragged the cot closer to the hearth, set down a second chair, and sat beside them. All night, listening to the wind hush against the windows, listening to Hope's soft breath. 3 days later, someone knocked on the door. It wasn't loud, just 2 raps, measured, intentional. Rourke was sharpening his blade. June was swaddling the baby. Both froze. Who'd come this far? She whispered. He didn't reply. Rourke stood, crossed to the door, and opened it slow. On the porch stood a boy. 15, maybe 16, thin, mud on his boots. He held his hat in his hands. Sir, he said, you Rourke? Yes. The boy's voice cracked. You got a girl here named June. Rourke's hand twitched near the doorframe. Who's asking? The boy licked his lips. I'm her brother. June stood so fast the chair toppled. What? The boy craned his neck, eyes lighting when he saw her. June, they said you were dead. June's breath left her body. She stepped out into the snow barefoot, child still in her arms. I don't understand, she whispered. The boy stepped forward. Father told the town you ran off, said you'd shamed us and were probably in the river by now. But then Ma got sick. She told me the truth, told me where he took you. Rourke's jaw was clenched. Why come now? He asked. The boy swallowed. Cause Pa's gone. Left in the night after the sheriff started asking about the preacher's son and some hush money. The town's turning. People are asking questions. And Ma said to find June. Said to bring her home if I could. June shook her head, stunned. Home. She looked at the baby, at Rourke. Then whispered, I already am. The boy, his name was Seth, slept curled up near the hearth that night, boots off, coat folded over his head, too afraid to ask for a real place to sleep but too tired to fight it. Rourke didn't push him. June didn't either. She had too many thoughts spinning in her head, and none of them were ready to land. She lay on the cot with Hope pressed to her chest, feeling the baby's breath rise against her ribs like a second heartbeat. Every few minutes she'd glance at the boy. He was so thin, dirt beneath his fingernails, a tear in one elbow. He'd made that journey on foot, alone, in snow that hadn't fully melted. June couldn't imagine how far he'd walked to find her, but she also couldn't imagine going back, not to that house, not to that town, not to the world that spat her out like spoiled milk. It was different now. She had hope, she had quiet, she had Rourke. And she had no idea where she stood with him. Rourke had barely said 3 words since the boy arrived. He'd gone back to his routine, cleaning, chopping wood, checking traps. But something was wound tighter in his shoulders now, something guarded in the way he watched June and Seth when he thought they weren't looking. He didn't ask her what she planned to do. But he didn't need to. The choice was circling her all night, scratching at her brain like a restless bird. Could she go back? Was it even safe? What if the people had truly turned against her father? What if they hadn't? What if the whispers about the preacher's son reached the wrong ears and they turned it all back on her? Again. And what about Rourke? He hadn't said much about the child, but he'd stayed. He'd helped. He'd carved a cradle. She'd found it behind the cabin, half-finished, made from pine wood and patience. The man who'd once only grunted at her now made her tea when she woke in the night. He didn't smile often, but when he did, it stayed in his eyes even after his lips had returned to a frown. She didn't want to lose that, didn't want to lose him. The next morning, the boy woke early, rubbing his eyes and looking around like he half expected to find it had all been a dream. He sat stiff at the table while June boiled oats. Hope was bundled close against her chest, twitching every now and then in newborn sleep. Seth cleared his throat. "Mama's sick." June paused. "What kind of sick?" "Her lungs. She's coughing up dark stuff. They say she won't last till summer unless she gets help." June turned from the stove. "And you came here alone?" He nodded. "Didn't have no choice. We ain't got money for doctors. And Mama kept saying she needed to see you again. Said she needed to ask your forgiveness before," he trailed off. June sat down slowly, heart pounding. The anger she'd carried for months tried to rise, but it was smothered by something heavier, grief maybe, or something softer, something tired. "Why didn't she stop him?" she whispered. "When he beat me, when he gave me away like I was cattle." "She tried. I swear she did," Seth said, his voice small. "But he told her if she ever spoke against him, he'd send her off same as he did you. And Mama, she ain't strong like you." June's jaw clenched. "I wasn't strong, I just got lucky." "No," Seth said, "you got out." Rourke stepped in then, shaking off snow, arms heavy with kindling. He said nothing, just set the wood near the hearth and knelt to feed the fire. June looked at him. "Did you hear?" He nodded once. She studied his face. There was something hidden behind those dark eyes, not judgment, not hope, something like a wall built long ago, stone by stone. "I don't know what to do," she said. "You don't have to decide now," Rourke replied. But she did. Because in that moment she realized something about herself, about everything that had happened since the day her father threw her on that wagon like a sack of grain. She hadn't just survived. She'd changed. Hardened, yes, but not in the way he'd meant her to. She was no longer someone else's problem. She was a mother now, and mothers don't run. That night she packed a small bag, enough clothes for a few days. Rourke gave her one of his coats. It drowned her, but she took it anyway. He didn't say much while she wrapped Hope in blankets, just hovered near the door like he was waiting for the last moment. Seth had already saddled one of Rourke's mules. The journey back to town would take a full day if they hurried, maybe longer with a newborn. "I won't stay long," June said quietly. "Just long enough to see her, long enough to know the truth." Rourke nodded. "You need anything." She stepped closer. "I know." There was a silence between them, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with everything they hadn't said, everything they might still say later. Then, just before she turned to leave, he said, "You come back." It wasn't a request. It wasn't a demand. It was a promise. She squeezed his hand. "I will." The road was worse than she remembered. Frozen ruts still lined parts of the trail, and the mules struggled under the weight of the three of them. June took turns walking to ease the burden, clutching hope to her chest beneath the folds of Rourke's coat. They arrived on the second morning, when the sun was just beginning to burn through the clouds. The town hadn't changed, not really. Still smelled like sawdust and horses. Still carried that low hum of whispers waiting to erupt into shouts. But people looked at her differently now. Not with scorn, not with pity. With fear. It was the baby, she thought. Or maybe the fact that she'd returned when they'd all counted her gone. Either way, she walked down that dirt road with her head high, her brother at her side, and not one person called her a name. Her mother was dying. The doctor confirmed it. Lungs failing, fever high, days left, maybe a week. They found her curled in bed, her once proud frame sunken into the mattress, her eyes clouded and rimmed with sorrow. When June stepped into the room, the woman tried to sit up, failed. "June," she rasped, "my baby." June sat down, laid Hope gently in her arms. For a moment the two women just stared at each other. "I'm sorry," her mother said. "I should have protected you." June blinked back tears. "You should have." "I know." And that was all. Forgiveness didn't come in a flood. It came in a whisper, a breath, a shared look between mother and daughter and granddaughter. She stayed 3 days, long enough to sit beside her mother as the woman slipped from this world, long enough to see the preacher's son arrested after Seth, emboldened by his sister's return, told the sheriff everything. Long enough to stand over her father's empty chair and realize he'd never return. Cowards don't die brave deaths, they just vanish. When June left the house for the last time, she carried Hope in one arm and Seth beside her. The boy looked up at her with something new in his eyes, not just admiration but trust. "What now?" he asked. She looked to the mountains. "I go home." He hesitated. "Can I come?" She studied his face, so young, so broken, so much like her. "Only if you're ready to work." He grinned. They made it back 3 days later. The trail was worse coming up, but June didn't feel it. The ache in her legs, the sting in her hands, it was all a price she was willing to pay. And when the cabin came into view, smoke curling from the chimney like a beacon, she felt something twist in her chest. Rourke was there, standing on the porch. Waiting. He stepped forward as she dismounted, eyes flicking from her to Seth to the bundle in her arms. "You came back," he said. She smiled. "Told you I would." Then, before she could think better of it, she pressed the baby into his arms. Hope stirred, blinked up at the man with the rough beard and gentler hands. "She's heavier now," he murmured. "She eats like her mother," June said with a laugh. And just like that, the three of them stepped inside. Home didn't always look like what you imagined. Sometimes it looked like a mountain man with too many scars, a boy with too much fear in his eyes, and a girl who'd once been thrown away learning she was worth being fought for. But it was home, and it was just beginning. The cabin had only ever known silence. It had been built by Rourke's hands, braced against the wind, seasoned by the cold, carved into the earth like he'd meant it to stand long after he was gone. For years, the only sounds it heard were the creak of wood under heavy boots and the whisper of fire crackling low. Now it was filled with something else entirely: movement, voices, the squall of a baby in the dawn hours, laughter and grief. It was strange how grief followed them even here, this far from town, where no one else came. June felt it when she opened the cupboard and her hand froze at the worn jar that once belonged to her mother. When she stepped out to gather snow for water and heard Seth coughing in the morning cold, too thin for the air. When Rourke sat too quietly near the fire, watching the baby sleep, his hand resting on the cradle he'd built as though anchoring himself to it. Grief lived in the edges of joy sometimes, but June had learned not to fear it anymore. She knew it meant something had mattered. They had settled into a rhythm of sorts. Not easy, not smooth, but real. Seth took to chores with quiet intensity, maybe because he didn't want to be sent away, maybe because it was the first time someone let him feel needed. June cooked and sewed and held her daughter close every hour she could, often rocking Hope in the cradle Rourke had finished with his own hands while they were gone. And Rourke, he was trying. He'd never say it aloud, wouldn't know how, but June saw it in the way he lingered near Seth, correcting the boy's grip on an axe without raising his voice. She saw it when he brought home extra rabbit from his traps without a word, when he carved the little wooden horse and left it on the end of Seth's bunk without claiming it. He'd gone from a man who spoke in grunts to one who left kindness in his silence. One night the storm rolled in hard, snow against the windows, wind howling like it was trying to pull the whole world down. June had Hope tucked against her, wrapped in quilts Rourke had reinforced with oilcloth. Seth had dragged his bunk closer to the hearth, and Rourke sat at the table, sharpening a blade with steady hands, but his eyes kept drifting toward June. She finally broke the silence. "You used to be alone up here, didn't you?" He didn't look up. "Still am sometimes." She nodded. "We're not going anywhere." "I know. But you don't believe it yet." He stopped sharpening. "You ever try to save something that didn't want saving?" June thought of her mother, her father, the preacher's son, herself in a way. "Yes," she said. He finally met her gaze. "It don't work." "No," she whispered, "but sometimes you try anyway." Hope stirred in her arms. June kissed her forehead. "Do you think she'll ever forgive me for bringing her into a world like this?" Rourke stood and walked over slow, as though each step mattered. He knelt beside her, his large hand brushing over the baby's head like he was afraid he'd break her. "She already has," he said softly. The wind howled louder outside, but it couldn't touch them there. Spring broke like a fever. One day the air was sharp and gray, the next it was warm enough for bare sleeves. The snow began to retreat in patches, letting brown earth peek through, soft and damp beneath boot soles. June took Hope out into the sun for the first time, and Rourke watched from the porch, arms folded, a smile hiding beneath his beard. Seth ran ahead, his boots kicking up mud, laughing for the first time since he arrived. It felt like something was thawing in all of them. But the thaw didn't just bring warmth. It brought noise, distant gunfire in the woods, a rider seen too close to the trail that led toward their cabin. Rourke tensed like an old hound with its ears pricked, and then came the knock. It was midday. June was inside feeding Hope, Seth out gathering wood. Rourke opened the door to find a man he didn't know, long coat, shotgun across his back and a badge pinned to his chest. A marshal, not local. "You work Halden?" the man asked. Rourke said nothing, just stepped aside slightly, a silent yes. The man took off his hat. "Name S. Bram. I came from 2 towns over looking for a girl. Name's June." June stepped out from the shadows before Rourke could say anything. She held Hope close, eyes narrowed. "Why?" The marshal looked surprised. "Didn't expect you to show yourself. Figured you'd run." "I'm done running," she said. He nodded. "There's trouble brewing in town. The preacher's son, he didn't take kindly to being arrested. His father's stirring up folks. Some want blood, they blame you." June's face didn't change. "They already blamed me once." Rourke's hand curled slightly at his side. He didn't reach for his gun, but the tension in his shoulders said he wanted to. "What do you want from me?" she asked. Bram looked between them. "Just to warn you, and to tell you something else. Your brother, the younger one, he's got folks whispering too. Told the whole town what your father did. Folks are listening." June blinked. "Seth." "He's not a boy anymore, ma'am. He's fighting like a man." She didn't know what to say to that. Pride and fear tangled in her chest. "Town might come for you," Bram said finally. "Or it might not, but if it does, I figure you ought to be ready." Then he tipped his hat, turned, and rode off without another word. The silence that followed was louder than anything. That night they didn't talk much. Rourke stood by the door longer than usual, one hand on the frame, the other near his rifle. June sat with Hope, holding her tighter than before. Seth kept close, the look in his eyes sharper than a child's ought to be. "Do you think they'll come?" June asked. Rourke didn't lie. "Maybe." "And if they do?" He looked at her, and the weight in his eyes made her stomach twist. "They won't get through me," he said. 2 nights later it started. Seth saw them first, 3 men at the tree line, moving quiet, thinking they weren't spotted. June shoved Hope into a cradle, whispering soft prayers, while Rourke grabbed the rifle off the mantel. "They won't stop at talking," he said. June looked at him. "We don't have to stay, we can run." "No," he said. "They need to know you're not prey anymore." She stared at him, her hands shaking. "Then I'm standing with you." He nodded once. "Get Seth inside, keep the baby close." But Seth wouldn't go. The boy stood in the doorway, holding a long stick like it was a weapon, eyes fierce. "I'm not hiding," he said. Rourke looked at him, then knelt and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're brave," he said, "but brave men know when to protect the ones who can't fight. Your sister needs you. That baby needs you." Seth bit his lip, then nodded, stepped inside, and closed the door behind him. The first shot came low, scattering snow. Rourke returned fire, dropping to one knee, aiming with calm precision. June ducked behind the porch beams, heart hammering. Her own fingers curled around the pistol Rourke had pressed into her palm weeks ago. One man broke cover. Rourke dropped him with a shot to the leg. The others fell back, confused. They hadn't expected resistance. They hadn't expected Rourke. Another figure emerged then, older, taller, the preacher. June's breath caught. "I only came to speak," the man called. Rourke didn't lower his rifle. "You brought guns to talk." "You brought shame to our town," the preacher spat. "You led your daughter into sin." "I led her nowhere," Rourke growled. "She made it out because you tried to bury her." The preacher stepped forward. "That child she carries, it's filth." Rourke didn't flinch. "Then why are you the one covered in mud?" The preacher's face twisted, fury burning red across his cheeks. "You'll regret protecting her." But before he could say more, a second voice rang out from the trees. "Leave them be." It was Seth. The boy had slipped out the back, climbed a tree, and now stood tall on a low branch, voice steady, echoing through the woods. "She's my sister, that baby's family. You want them, you come through me too." The preacher faltered. His men looked to him uneasy. And then a second voice joined Bram, the marshal, rifle raised, mounted behind the retreating men. "This ends here," Bram said, "or it ends with a rope." The preacher froze, then turned and vanished into the woods. Later, when the fire was low and the house was safe again, June sat beside Rourke, her hand on his. "You stayed," she said. "I told you I would." And when she looked at him, she knew. He wasn't just the man who saved her. He was the one who'd never let her fall again. The woods were breathing again, not the shallow, haunted gasps they used to take under winter's weight, but long, alive breaths. Spring had finally taken hold. Buds were curling on the branches, the ground softening under their boots, birds nesting low in the shrubs and hollows. But inside the cabin, time moved differently. After the standoff with the preacher and his men, something in June settled. It wasn't peace, not exactly. She didn't trust peace. But it was something quieter than fear. Maybe the beginnings of safety. Or the hard one, understanding that danger could come and she'd survive it, not alone anymore. Hope grew fast, quicker than June had expected. Her little legs kicked against the world with defiance, her eyes wide and unblinking, always searching. Rourke had made her a rattle from a length of birch wood and old brass buttons, carved smooth so her tiny hands could grip it without splinters. June often caught him watching the baby when he thought no one noticed, as if she were something he didn't deserve to see. June didn't ask what he saw when he looked at her daughter. Maybe a future he never thought he'd want. Maybe the life he should have had if not for the war, the loss, the silence he kept like a wound he couldn't stop reopening. But he looked at Hope like she mattered more than he did. And that, to June, meant everything. Seth, too, had changed. The boy who once cowered behind her skirt now walked taller, moved with the quiet instinct of someone who'd been taught by the trees. He and Rourke hunted together. Not often. Rourke still did most of it alone. But sometimes he let the boy shadow him. And every time they came back with a rabbit or squirrel or even just a story about tracks in the mud, Seth's chest swelled a little bigger. June knew what it was like to feel invisible. Watching her brother come into view was like seeing part of herself come back to life. But the world beyond the cabin hadn't forgotten them. Not yet. One day a letter arrived. It wasn't carried by horse or rider. It was tied to a rock and thrown through the window just after dawn. The shatter woke all three of them. Hope began wailing immediately, and June rushed to her, barefoot on the floorboards, heart hammering. Rourke was already crouched by the broken glass, one hand gripping his rifle, the other lifting the rock wrapped in parchment. He read the words silently, jaw tightening. Then he handed it to June without a word. It was written in a spidery hand. "The child is an abomination. The mother's sin lingers. He who shelters them will answer for both. We haven't forgotten. We're coming." June folded the note slowly. Her hands didn't shake this time. She was done shaking. "They still think they can scare us," she said. "They might not be wrong," Rourke murmured. She looked at him. "Not because we're weak," he added, "but because we've got something to lose now." Preparations began immediately. Rourke doubled the traps near the tree line. He showed Seth how to make snares that would trip a man rather than catch a rabbit. June boiled extra jars of soup, sealed them, and tucked them away in a root cellar she helped dig by hand. They didn't speak much about what was coming, but they all knew. Trouble was moving again, slow as smoke at first, but it would find them. A week passed, then two. Then, one morning, Rourke came back from the northern trail bleeding from his shoulder. June rushed to him, tearing the sleeve open with frantic hands. "A trap," he muttered, "wasn't mine." They'd set something for him, not just words this time, not just threats. Seth helped her clean the wound, grinding his teeth the whole time. The boy had become fiercer than anyone had expected. But what scared June wasn't his anger, it was how quiet he became now when danger came. Like Rourke. Hope sat nearby, chewing the corner of a cloth, watching everything like she understood more than she should. "We can't wait for them to choose the hour," June said that night. Her hands were red with blood and pine sap, her voice steady. "They want to push us," Rourke said. "Push us until we lash back. That's how cowards fight." "Then we need to decide what we are," she said, voice low. "Prey or problem?" The following morning, June left the baby with Seth and went with Rourke to the high ridge. From there, you could see the whole valley spread like a map. Smoke curled in the distance. Someone was camping near the river, close enough to make her stomach twist. She crouched beside Rourke. "We didn't ask for this," she said. He nodded. "They want a reckoning. Then we give them one." He turned to look at her. She didn't flinch. Not anymore. The fight didn't come with drums, no shouting, no torches through the trees. It came with silence and a snapping twig. 3 men moved through the woods, stepping carefully, one with a long rifle, one with a rope, one with something wrapped in burlap that clinked like bottles. They didn't know Rourke had been waiting since before first light. They didn't know Seth had set traps behind them. They didn't know June had climbed the tree above their heads, pistol tucked into her waistband, knife in her boot. The first man walked straight into a snare. He hit the dirt hard, wind knocked out of him. Before he could shout, Seth was there, stick drawn like a sword. "Don't move," the boy said, and he didn't. The second man turned, saw movement in the trees, and raised his rifle, only for Rourke to step from behind a stump and level his own. "Drop it." He didn't argue. The third man turned to run, but June dropped from the branch like a hawk, landing hard, her boot catching his leg. He toppled. When he looked up, she had the pistol trained between his eyes. "You came for a baby," she said. "Now you answer for it." They tied the men, searched them. The bottles had kerosene. They'd meant to burn the cabin with hope inside. That was the line. Bram came the next day. The marshal took one look at the tied men and nodded. "We'll take them in," he said. "Won't be the only ones." "You knew?" Rourke asked. Bram sighed, heard whispers, took time to follow. June looked at him. "They wanted to kill a child." He looked back at her. "And you stopped them, that matters." The trial was quiet, but word spread louder than the verdict ever could. Men from the preacher's camp were arrested. The preacher himself slipped into the night, never to be seen again. June didn't celebrate. Rourke didn't smile, but there was something like stillness now. Hope learned to stand that week, wobbly on her feet, arms flailing like a baby bird. June wept watching it. "I thought she'd grow up in fear," she whispered. "She'll grow up free," Rourke said. They didn't return to town. They didn't need to. News came to them now. Word of a town changing slowly. Of women whispering about what had been done to June. of men reevaluating their silence. Seth decided to stay through summer, then fall, then always. And one day, when the air was warm again, and the trees full of green, Rourke came to June with something in his hands. A ring, carved from old walnut wood, smooth and simple. "I never thought I'd ask anyone," he said, "but I can't not." June smiled. "You already did, Rourke." And she slipped it on her finger like it had always belonged there. The seasons turned, not abruptly, but with a patient, knowing ease. Spring melted into summer, summer folded into autumn, and the colors of the mountain deepened like bruises healing. Soft golds, rust reds, the green shadows thick in the hollows. Life, it seemed, no longer had to be fought for every breath. But June never let herself forget what they came through to reach this quiet. The mountain did not belong to them, not really. It was something older, vast, and watchful. But in a way it had claimed them, wrapped around them like a guardian no man could intimidate. The cabin stood strong. The roof no longer leaked. The cracks had been sealed. A new window, too, Rourke had fashioned it himself with salvaged glass and a frame of white pine. Every time June saw sunlight fall through it, and onto Hope's tiny feet, she remembered the sound of the old one shattering, and vowed that no man would ever threaten that peace again. Hope was toddling now, fast as her little legs could carry her. She had Rourke's stubborn brow and June's wary eyes. She laughed often but trusted slowly. The woods didn't scare her. She liked birds and mushrooms and sitting on her haunches watching bugs scuttle over tree bark. Rourke took to carving animals for her, tiny bears, foxes, a wildcat with exaggerated ears, and she lined them up on the mantel as if they were soldiers guarding her world. June, meanwhile, had found something unexpected, the ability to breathe without guilt. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. She even laughed now. Sometimes she would forget herself, then catch her reflection in the basin and hardly recognize the woman staring back. Her face had filled out again. The hollowness was gone. Her eyes weren't scared anymore. And Rourke, he was softer in his way, not less strong. He still moved like a boulder, quiet and steady. But now he let his guard drop when he looked at June, when he touched Hope's tiny fingers, when he sat beside Seth and let the boy ask 100 questions about every tree and star in sight. The ring June wore, the walnut band he'd carved for her, never came off. It didn't need gold or polish. It was made from the same mountain that had saved them, and that meant more than any gem. One afternoon, after the sun had dipped and painted the trees orange, Rourke stood in the doorway, watching the horizon like he always did. June came beside him, one hand on his arm. He was quiet, but the quiet wasn't heavy like before. This time, it was more like reverence. "What is it?" she asked softly. He didn't speak right away. Then, "Used to think there was nothing left for me, that I was just waiting to fade into this mountain." She waited, knowing better than to interrupt him when he unraveled thoughts he rarely shared. "But now," he continued, eyes still on the ridge, "I think I was being carved out, hollowed slowly, like the wood I use for rings. It ain't useless because it's been cut. It's stronger when it's shaped." June squeezed his arm. "You weren't shaped to carry nothing, Rourke. You were shaped to carry us." That night he held her close. Their breaths synced beneath the fur blanket, and neither of them said a word. They didn't need to. Winter approached slower than the year before. There were still squirrels darting under the porch, still wild hens scratching near the root cellar. But June saw the change in the birds. They flew lower now, searching for food, and the nights cooled sooner. She began gathering again. Herbs, firewood, preserves. Rourke set new traps. Seth practiced splitting wood with careful hands. There was a calm preparation this time, not frantic like last year. They were no longer unsure of themselves. They were ready. But then near the end of October, a rider came. It had been months since a stranger made it this far up the mountain. June saw the man before he reached the path. She was foraging berries near the ridge and spotted the flash of a horse's mane moving slow through the woods. She ducked, heart pounding. Not fear exactly, something older, the instinct that had kept her alive before. The man wore a black coat, worn but neat, and his hat sat low. His back was straight, posture too disciplined for a traveler. She slipped back to the cabin in silence, eyes wide. Rourke was on the porch, sanding a rail. One look at her face and he stood. "Stranger," she whispered, "coming slow, looks like a lawman." He handed Seth the sanding tool and went to fetch his rifle. June pulled Hope close and stepped into the cabin, setting her near the hearth. 15 minutes later, the rider appeared. He came without arrogance, dismounted respectfully. His boots crunched frost-dusted leaves. He removed his hat, revealing graying blonde hair and a face lined not with cruelty but with long, tired judgment. "My name is Sheriff Bernard Lyle," he said. "I don't mean trouble." June stepped out onto the porch. Trouble never says it means trouble. Rourke stayed behind her, silent. "I came because of the trial," the sheriff said. "Preacher Wilkes never stood for his charges. He vanished, but his ledger was found with names, lists, transactions." Rourke stepped forward now. "What kind of transactions?" The sheriff hesitated. "He sold girls to men outside the county. Some were bartered away by family." June went cold. "Some," the sheriff continued, "weren't sent alone. There are notes. One girl in particular listed with her brother. It matches your story. That ledger makes her father complicit. We're preparing arrests." June felt her knees weaken. "You mean to tell me," Rourke growled, voice low, "you're only now dealing with this?" The sheriff's eyes were honest but weary. "I'm here because I intend to do the right thing now, but I need her testimony." "No," June said immediately. "I'll protect you." "You weren't there before," she snapped. "You didn't protect me when I was marched up a mountain like an offering. You didn't protect Seth." "I didn't know," the sheriff said, "but I do now." She looked at Rourke. He wasn't moving. "She deserves her peace," he said. "She earned it." The sheriff nodded. "I'll leave you with the choice. But if she comes to town, she can help make sure it doesn't happen to another girl." He left the papers, then wrote off no demands, no threats, just silence. That night June didn't speak for hours. Hope slept curled against her. Seth watched her from across the room, understanding more than a child should. "Do you want to go?" Rourke finally asked. "I don't know." He waited. "I want to help," she whispered, "but I'm scared. Scared if I see him again, I won't be strong enough. Scared I'll go back to that girl I used to be." "You won't," he said. "You couldn't if you tried. That girl died. You're someone else now." She looked up. "Who?" "Someone braver than me," he said, "and I've seen war." She left 3 days later. Not alone. Rourke came with her. Seth stayed behind to watch Hope, brave and steady with a shotgun across his lap. Bram met them halfway and guided them to town. The courthouse was small but full. The other girls were there, some older, some too young, each with a name once scribbled in that ledger. June stood and told her story. She didn't cry. She didn't break. She told them how her father traded her away, how Wilkes blessed it, how she was sent to a man in the mountains to disappear. And then she told them how she lived, how she found family, how she found freedom. The crowd didn't stir, not at first, But by the end, people were crying. Wilkes was declared wanted across 3 states. Her father arrested. No one stood up to defend him, not a soul. June returned home changed, not damaged, not undone, but fuller. She kissed Hope's forehead and whispered, "Your mama did what she had to." And Rourke took her hand and whispered, "And now you never have to again." The air on the mountain was different now. Not just colder, but cleaner somehow, sharper with each breath, as if something in the soil had shifted and released the last of the pain that had been buried with the snows of the year before. June walked slower those days, not because her body failed her, but because she had learned to stop rushing through moments she'd once never thought she'd survive. There was peace in the quiet between footfalls. The wind didn't whisper warnings anymore. It carried lullabies. Hope toddled through the fallen leaves like she owned the ridge. Her little boots kicked up gold and red, her laughter echoing against the distant trees. Seth trailed behind her, no longer the terrified boy hiding behind a crate, but a steady young man who understood what it meant to shield someone you loved. He didn't have to be asked to watch her. He just did, like he was born knowing how. June stood by the doorway of the cabin, arms crossed over a wool shawl, watching her children, watching the way they belonged in this place, how none of it looked borrowed anymore. The cabin wasn't just shelter. It was theirs. Built with sweat and choice and love, it had held their grief and their healing both. Rourke stepped behind her, a hand on her back. "Cold's coming early," he murmured. June leaned into his chest, nodding. "I feel it, but we're ready." They always were now. Inside, hanging above the fireplace, were the carved names Rourke had made, one for each of them. June, Seth, Hope. Even Bram, though the old man lived lower down the mountain now, still stubborn, still kind, a neighbor who never needed to be asked twice. He brought sugar sometimes and stories always. That winter was different. Not easier, but somehow lighter. There were nights when the wind howled like a beast outside, and they huddled close around the fire with mugs of tea and stories. Rourke built a cradle for Hope, with foxes and owls etched into the corners. June made a quilt, her fingers finally steady enough for stitches. Seth learned how to trap rabbits and skin them, and each time he came home with a catch, he puffed up a little taller. And there were days, even in the heart of the freeze, where June would step outside and not feel hunted anymore, where no shadow made her flinch, where she could close her eyes and just be. Spring came sooner than expected. The first green showed up in the crocus near the stones, and then in the birch sap, and suddenly the woods were waking all at once. Hope had a birthday, 2 years old and louder than thunder. Bram came up the mountain with a basket full of preserved peaches and whittled a horse for her, rough but loved. She screamed with joy and dragged it behind her wherever she went. They celebrated with honey cakes and wildflower crowns, and Seth playing a lopsided tune on a banjo Bram had fixed up. June didn't cry that day. She didn't need to. Everything she loved was around her, and for the first time she didn't feel like she owed anyone pain for being happy. Later that night, after the sun dipped low and the stars came out one by one, June sat on the porch with Rourke. Hope was asleep inside, curled against Seth's side, both of them dreaming. "You ever think," she whispered, "that all this came from something meant to break us?" Rourke didn't answer right away. Then, "Things only break you if you let them. You didn't, you bent, you screamed, but you kept walking." "I almost didn't," she said softly. "But you did," he replied, "and that's what matters." June turned her head, looked at him. "What about you? What kept you going before me?" He didn't look at her, just stared out over the trees like he could see his old ghosts there. "Habit, I guess. Guilt. Then one day there you were, carried up my mountain like punishment, but you were the thing that stopped the silence. She touched his cheek. You saved me. He shook his head. We saved each other. That summer word came by Ryder. Her father had died in prison. No ceremony, no farewell, just a notice and the unspoken understanding that he'd been buried somewhere unmarked, forgotten. June stood by the stream that evening, the paper in her hand, and let the wind tear it from her fingers. She didn't weep. She didn't curse. She let it go. That night she told Rourke, he's gone. He nodded. That part of your story's done then. Yes, she whispered, it is. The years passed gently after that. Hope grew fierce and bright. Seth became a man, quiet like Rourke, but with a sharper wit. He left when he was 17 to work with Bram down by the foothills, but came back every month, bringing supplies and books and laughing harder than he ever had before. He wrote letters now, long ones, and June kept every single one folded in the old tea tin near the stove. Rourke's beard turned gray first, then his hair. His strength never faded, but he moved slower, his joints stiffer in the cold. June teased him for it. He called her trouble like he always had, and she smiled each time. They never left the mountain. Not once. Not even when folks invited them to town for harvest fairs or markets. Their world was here. The path that brought her up to the ridge in chains had become a road she walked freely now, with Hope skipping ahead and calling out names for trees and birds she knew by heart. One fall morning, when the trees were just beginning to shed and the air carried the scent of smoke and damp leaves, June woke early. Rourke was already dressed, sitting at the table, staring at nothing in particular. "You all right?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "Had a dream." "About what?" "Your father," he said, voice quiet. "He was standing at the edge of the ridge, didn't say a word, just looked at me." June waited. "I think I forgave him," Rourke said finally. "Not because he deserved it, but because I don't want him living in my bones anymore." June nodded. "You don't have to carry what he did." "I don't," he agreed. "I carry you Hope, this cabin, that's enough." She reached across the table and took his hand. It was still strong, still his. That winter Rourke caught sick. Nothing sudden, just a cough that lingered too long, a tiredness in his bones. He fought it, of course, tried to split wood like nothing had changed, but June saw it. And when he lay in bed one night, too weak to sit, June climbed in beside him and laid her head on his chest. "You gave me everything," she whispered. "No," he rasped, "you gave me purpose." Tears came, she let them fall. "I don't want you to go." "I won't," he breathed. "I'll be here, in the floorboards, in the trees, in that girl's laugh. You'll see me everywhere." And she did. When he passed, it was quiet, peaceful, no pain in his face, just rest, real, deserved rest. They buried him behind the cabin, under the spruce tree where he used to carve rings. Seth came home and wept openly, kneeling by the grave. Hope didn't understand at first, but when she placed the fox carving on the dirt and said, "Papa's sleeping now," June knew she would grow to remember him as love, not loss. Years later, when Hope was grown, when Seth had children of his own, June still lived on the mountain. Her hair silver, her hands gnarled from work, but her spirit untouched. The ledger that once listed her like property had long since rotted in some courthouse archive. No one spoke of Wilkes or her father anymore. But they spoke of June. The girl who was traded like cattle. The woman who stood in court and changed laws with her truth. The mother who raised children not with fear, but with fierce, boundless love. And sometimes, when the wind was just right and the stars were bright above the cabin, she'd sit on the porch and close her eyes. The mountain would hum beneath her feet, and she'd feel him beside her again. Not in sorrow, but in the memory of everything they built from ruin. From punishment came purpose. From fear came family. From pain came peace. And that peace, she had earned every piece of it.